Do you wish you could get virtual attendees to turn their cameras on? Is engagement the number one issue on your virtual meetings? Do you want your meeting to be the most engaging virtual meeting? Well, welcome to the Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast. In this podcast, we'll talk to the top people around the world in virtual meetings and give you, the listener, the best ideas to host engaging virtual meetings. Make sure that you click subscribe so you can get the latest episode of the Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast. Now, let's welcome your host, the author of the #1 Amazon hot new release, Engaging Virtual Meetings, John Chen. All right, this is John Chen with another Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast. Geez, is it Thursday already? Oh my gosh, wait, it's Friday. I'm on the wrong day. That's how fast this week has been going. I hope each of you have been having a great summer. It's been beautiful. In fact, here, let me just spend a little time here in my backyard where I've installed a pergola. And so let's see if my next guest knows what a pergola is. We've been working on the backyard leading up to, by the way, if you haven't seen it, you now have an invitation to my either in-person or virtual birthday party coming up on August 26th. Well, this next guest I've known for a long time. We've gotten the chance to work together. He's really done a lot to really help the legal situation here in Seattle. He's been on the Asian Bar Association here in Seattle as a leadership position, and I'm always really impressed with the work that he does. Please, let's take a moment here to welcome our next guest, Jeffrey Liang. Hey, Jeffrey, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, John. Thank you for the introduction.
You're welcome. And really, truly, again, Jeff, you've been a pillar in the leadership here in Seattle on multiple aspects, mostly on, or some on the law aspect, some on your advocacy for that. So let's, of course, start with the easy question, Jeffrey. Why don't you do a favor for my friends who don't know you? Take a moment to introduce yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Yes, and thank you, John, for letting me be here, and everyone else for joining the live stream. My name is Jeff Liang. I'm a partner at the law firm of Banyan Legal Counsel. Another partner and I, Linda Fang, we actually just formed our firm 3 weeks ago, and so we focus a lot on championing BIPOC communities and trying to strengthen our communities as well too. And with that, we provide legal services, and specifically we represent a lot of small businesses, nonprofits, families. So we'll do just business contracts, just help businesses and nonprofits with employment issues, especially small restaurants with who don't have an HR department. I also handle some estate planning and some probate, and then we also help nonprofits. But I think a big part of our firm is just being community focused, and that's what Linda and I both share in that mission.
You see, now, how many years you've been practicing law, Jeff, if I can ask? It's probably
man,
been a while.
It makes me realize how old I am now too, or how I'm getting older. But I think it's been my 13th year of law practice.
Oh my gosh, 13. Yeah, I just hit 26 years in my own team building and business with that. So
I know I saw in your intro video the Prodigy, and I was like, hey, I use Prodigy. That's how I used to get online too. So I remember Prodigy getting online.
That would make you the OG in the virtual aspect, Jeff. So why did you choose law out of all the different things that you could do?
I think it was about impact, right? For me, even before law school, I always wanted to know how to help people, how to assist people in just different ways. And I think law was the way I wanted to do it. And with impact, it was a way to be able to advocate or represent. And I think back to my parents. My dad had a small business. He's an immigrant. He moved here. And he just kind of had to learn on the fly. And just from that experience, and me being at the shop with him, he had a sheet metal shop. Just seeing kind of what he had to go through on the business side, and navigate legal and tax issues, it was, I think, a motivator for me to try to go to law school and help similar business owners.
Yeah, I don't know if you knew, but my grandparents, of course, started here, and they made it with as a gardening business and a grocery business with about a third grade education, and they were able to send 5 kids to college. Right. So kudos to
Yeah.
your dad. And so when you saw those struggles, I mean, was it give me a good like example of like maybe your favorite client. I know you can't say any names or things like that, but is there something that you can share like what can you use law to help some of these, smaller or different businesses in what they do?
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint a favorite client, but I will say I think about impact, right? And
Yes.
how I had to redefine the term impact. Specifically, in the beginning of the pandemic, people were just scared, right? Business owners, individuals were scared. Business owners, especially, thinking everything shut down. How am I going to continue? So I had to think about how I support those business owners, right? And for me, it was just to offer pro bono consultations to anyone, anywhere in the country. I had a camera, I had a microphone, I had a keyboard, I had a laptop, and it was just I could meet anyone anywhere. Kind of what you're doing, John, right? How you can do these team meetings and you could reach beyond just in person. I was doing the same with consultations. But what that experience taught me, so I did a few hundred hours of pro bono just during those 2 years, talking to small
Mhm.
business owners, even talking about individuals, who would call and say they're coughing and their employer is telling them to go back to work. This is before vaccines and before testing. And so really what those experiences taught me was empathy, right? And how I define impact. Law school and just my upbringing taught me impact was winning your case, closing the deal, right? But what these experiences really taught me was that impact really it's not really important what I think is impactful. It's what my clients or it's what the people I'm talking to think is impactful. It's how I'm helpful to them. Because it was difficult. I'm talking to these individuals. I don't know if I'm helpful to them. I don't know if I've solved their problem. But what I've done is at least talk to them, give them some perspective and some thoughts and ideas. And I think that's what really helped me.
Well, it's really too at a time when there's so much uncertainty. I mean, the law at least does one thing, is that it's supposed to try and give certainty, but then of course the interpretation of the law is the challenging part because right, Corona wasn't the pseudo unprecedented event. There was a lot of not of guidelines for things like this, so you had to use a version of common sense versus what does the past give us as indicators about what to do with that. Does that sound about right, Jeff? About how you approach some of them?
I mean, it's exactly right. As a lawyer, we're usually trained to look at what's happened before. We're
Right.
we're trained by analogy. There
Right.
was no analogy, well, at least for us, other than the 1900 pandemic, which I
Right.
didn't live through, and I didn't know anyone lived through it.
Right.
I didn't have an analogy, so a lot of this was just trying to learn on the fly. So it was like a different skill that I had to extend, right, than just analogy. It was about trying to empathize and understand, and like you said, some of it common sense, some of it guessing, and some of it saying, "I hope this is what it means." Especially when you deal with like the government loans called the PPP. There weren't any rules there really, or they were making up the rules as we go along. So we kind of just had to figure it out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I think you'll appreciate. I know I was here when the Dalai Lama visited Seattle, which was a landmark event, and he just talked about compassion, right? Really being one of the core things that he wants to bring to a place in an area. And compassion is what I think really was needed too for the Asian Pacific Islander audience, right? So, by being part of BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, People of Color, right? API is Asian Pacific Islander. And again, Jeffrey, I know that you've done a lot of advocacy and work in this area. What was your personal view of some of the things happening with either businesses or your clients in the Asian Pacific Islander? I mean, the international district here in Seattle has definitely reported that it was not easy. I think that was the short version of it.
I would say my initial, how I felt fear. I was just scared. Even though I was at home behind my computer, safe, right? I was just scared for my community, and my community meaning my parents, my friends,
Mhm.
business owners, my clients, especially in, not just in the Seattle Chinatown International District, but everywhere. You just saw so much Asian hate, right? Um, and so, to me, it was just like, what do I do? You just feel so powerless. I felt so powerless about what I do. I remember, just doing what I can. And a couple of things I recall, I remember when, the people were breaking into restaurants in the Seattle Chinatown International District. And I remember people, or I was just talking to people, and they're saying, yeah, the business owner's like, we're gonna come and go to our store and bring our guns, and we're gonna go protect it and everything too. And I was just like, what that actually did recall was at the time during the Rodney King riots, right? When the Korean store owners went to go defend their stores.
Right.
And, even though they were out there doing their job to try to protect their community, there was some tragedy. I think there was an accidental friendly fire shooting where a teenager got shot and killed. And I put that image and that story on the Facebook group where people were talking about, like, yeah, we're gonna bring our guns, we're gonna go defend ourselves. And I just said, hey, we gotta, just remember this, we don't want to repeat the storylines here, right?
Right.
So that was a lot of fear, right? In that sense. And then the other thing too was, the powerlessness was that's where, going back to what I was talking about in terms of just trying to reach out to people and doing what I can as a lawyer, right? I'm talking about how do we navigate these issues, talking to community leaders as well, to talking to other elected officials about the struggles and issues that are challenges going on in our community.
Yeah, so thanks so much for that insightful view. I mean, the international district, I remember one time it had to have either private security hired, or there were some vigilante, like basically collections of people had to come in and try and patrol to keep the area safe. And so that's so tough for an area that, right, it was already having its enough challenges. It was like challenges on top of stacked on top of challenges, right?
So you just remind me of another story. I remember in the early part when things were getting rough there. I'm on the board of the Chinatown International District BIA, Business Improvement Area. And there's the co-chair Barry Blatt and we were just saying, what do we do? And so I remember Barry and I were saying, you know what? I'm just going to go down there and drive around at 3 a.m. and just do a patrol. And here I am untrained, and my spouse, my wife, was just looking at me like, you're nuts. What are you gonna do? Driving around in your Prius, and what are you gonna do? No one's gonna be scared of that. But luckily, I was able to reach someone who does private security, and
right.
We actually, were able to get a private security guard to just drive around. We told them, don't engage. You're not law enforcement. We just need you to report. Because there's also a lot of distrust of the police and law enforcement. Right. And so we told them, you're just there to kind of report and just see what's going on. And so that was very interesting, in trying to do that. And then I know that there was another group that went around to try to do patrolling. And that was just great to see the community take action.
Yeah, do something. I think that was really one of the key pieces. So I want to go back now then to like their last 3 years. And one of the primary ways that you said that you helped is you saying, look, I've got a camera, I have a laptop, I have a keyboard, right? And I've got some skills. And, that alone too, in some ways makes you privileged, right, Jeffrey? If we talk a little bit about the digital divide, but I want to hear, what did you do before pandemic that was virtual? But more importantly, like, how did you adapt to going online, Jeff?
I don't think I was barely virtual. I mean, the only thing that I did before the pandemic was telephone conferences. I think we did do virtual for some nonprofit board meetings. I did some trainings that way. Zoom was just new to my terminology, right? And so it was all telephone conferences. I remember having to send out the 1-800 number, and then you have to dial the access code, and then you have to wait, and then everyone's like, are you there? Can you hear me? And then you have to every time you speak, you say, hey, this is Jeff. Right? Which I still do, even in virtual meetings. I still say, hey, this is Jeff. I don't know why. I just do it still. In terms of the pivot, thankfully, because I had started doing some virtual meetings, I had the equipment, right? So once it occurred and I realized my clients just wanted to have consultations, it was easy. Zoom was there, Teams, Google Meet, microphone, and over time, it was interesting. I had to learn that you can't just have rudimentary basic equipment, because a lot of it is when the clients want to meet with me, they don't want to see grainy video. They don't want to see, stuttering or the microphone really not working. So I really had to invest in better equipment. I'm not like professional lighting or anything like that, but better cameras and better microphones. And then also too, the other thing I had to do is my wife is a user researcher at Microsoft. And so she went and started talking to my clients and just saying like, what can Jeff do to make things easier to connect? So that was that, and me having the technology, but then I had to get people to connect to me, and a lot of that was through scheduling systems, right? Just making it easier to connect to me and to find me and booking time rather than having to call, exchange 70 emails. So using booking systems, using easier online forms, just making the workflow easier of reaching me and connecting to me. So I think that was the other aspect too, is trying to make it more user centered or client centered.
These are all great tips. You don't mind if I want to ask some of the tech tips, right? So grainy video, stuttering, and microphone. What were the three things that you really did? I'd love to hear, if you don't mind sharing, which camera or mic, and then what did you do to maybe upgrade your internet service to get to the level you needed to?
Yeah, internet service definitely had to do gigabit internet service, and I try not to use the Wi-Fi if I'm online. If I have a laptop, I try to use a docking station that plugs into the Ethernet. For my microphone and cameras, wow, I've gone through so many. I have like a drawer full of cameras, and so, but I finally settled on the Logitech 4K. I don't know what it is, but it's there. It's this one. But I remember I really wanted it during the height of the pandemic. Of course, everything was in short supply, so I had to like
Yep.
be online every day to refresh. Oh, I found it, and then buy it at a market, of course. Yeah. Um, and then the other thing I recently got is the Microsoft has a audio dock, which is a speaker and microphone all in one. Because I
Oh,
used to have like one of those microphones, like the Blue Yeti microphones,
yeah,
and then
yeah,
a camera, and I was like, okay, let me see what I can combine. So
yeah.
the Microsoft dock is great. It's good in terms of audio and also being a microphone itself. And so and then just learning, the ins and out of Teams,
Yes.
doing webinars there, and Zoom, and then Google, and then even WebEx.
Yep. 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 What did you use for your booking system, right? Because Microsoft finally has a booking system. It
Yes.
was one of the best things that I've did. I think I've counted. I've probably clocked over 3,000 meetings or so over the
Wow.
last 3 years, if not more.
So I started out with You Can Book Me,
Yes.
that service, and then when I joined Keller Werbach, I moved to the Microsoft Booking service just because it
Right.
was included in our subscription.
That's
But
right.
I moved back to You Can Book Me just because I like a little bit more customization than
Hmm.
Microsoft Bookings, but in terms of just like how I engage clients, because I have a certain workflow. I have to get them to complete an intake form. Microsoft Team, the booking form, a little bit more difficult to do that. And then I like to tie my data together. I use another program called Zapier so that
Yes.
I can make apps connect to each other. It's a little bit easier to connect the apps and You Can Book Me than it is in the Microsoft Booking form.
I know I should do that because you can take all the people who book a meeting and shove them in your, CRM or like I use Salesforce and automatically move one to the other so that you can start then adding on in the workflow. All those little things, especially as a smaller business, are great. It means that you can, prevent getting assistance or, having to hire more people if you can automate some of these things. So I wanted to share too, why you say this is Jeff, right, on a call, even on a virtual call, is actually really useful. It was one of our best practices because what it does especially on a phone call, right? Unless you have very distinct voices, right? If you have a large call, it is really tough to figure out who's talking. So we actually said, I wrote it in my book. It's called Go Ahead Caller, right? So it's kind of like when you are on a radio show, right? So you say, "Hi, this is Jeff," right? And so the radio DJ too would say, "Go ahead, Jeff," because we on a large conference call, if multiple people said their name, right? If we both said at the same time, "This is John, this is Jeff," right? Then the person who's hosting the call could decide which one of us should go first, so we don't start talking over each other. Uh, so these are all great things that you picked up, and I appreciate that you had some of the shared some of the technology that really made it better. All of these things are, and I love actually that you you recruited your wife to ask questions about what do we need to do to connect, right? To
Mhm.
really, really connect on virtual. Was there anything else too that you've noticed? Things that you do on virtual. So here, I'll share one of them, Jeffrey, which is research has shown there's actually a class on LinkedIn Learning. And the class on LinkedIn Learning is actually called the Neuroscience of Virtual Selling. And the class actually said this that if you don't show your hands at least once during a virtual call, right? People are 20% less likely to trust or want to buy from you.
Mm.
So I don't know if you've seen anything else like that, or because like one thing as a lawyer, probably the number one thing that you're trying to create is trust.
Yes.
So I'm kind of curious, what are some of the things that you developed over the last 3 years to help your clients, gain their trust quickly?
That is difficult, especially that's one of the concerns I have about pivoting to virtual is that, and when you meet in person, you get the mannerisms, right? You get the cues, and virtual, it's a little bit harder. One of the things that I did is I realized the placement of my camera. So, and I'm still testing it out. I started putting the camera on top of the monitor. The one
Yes.
thing I didn't like was made it look like I was looking up, right?
Yeah.
But what I wanted to experience the client to think that I wanted them to know that I'm looking at them, but I can't look at the screen because if I look at the screen, I'm not looking at the camera. So one of the things I'm trying to place my camera where I can stare into the camera and talk, just like do a TV interview, right? So that my client sees that I'm talking to them, right? And making eye contact with them. But it's odd because in an in-person meeting, I can actually make eye contact with them. But here I'm looking at the camera and talking, assuming that I'm making eye contact. So that was one thing, right? The other thing, besides that, those little small things, it's really just about listening.
Mhm.
I think all lawyers are probably good at just listening and trying to find the issues, right? Whether regardless of what's in person. But I think virtual is so easy to be distracted because I have four windows open right now, and you're getting pings and everything too. And so it's easy to get distracted. So that's one of the things I think is just like trying to make sure that I don't get distracted and stay engaged because it's so easy to get disengaged in a virtual meeting, right? Um, Especially if you're trying to take notes or something too. So for me, I think that's kind of what it's hard. It's just trying to find the way to engage. So it's really just trying to make sure my client thinks I'm engaged or looking at them and then listening, really showing that I'm listening and repeating back, summarizing things that they're telling me just so that I can keep the conversation active.
So yeah, so there's really a couple things buried inside of here. They're so good. Here, I'll show you this. I don't know if you've heard about this. Have you seen this thing? It's called the center cam.
Mm. Oh,
It's
I've
com-
seen that, I think, online where it just drops down. Yeah.
so this is a clip. This is a HD camera. It clips to the top, so you can actually. What I do is I position it 1/3 down the frame, and so you can actually put it over somebody's eyes, Jeffrey, and especially you. Like the majority of your calls, I think, are like one-on-one, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So then again, what I do too is another trick that I do is I put it in speaker mode so that
Mm.
the person becomes as big as the screen is.
Oh, okay.
So that's a really good trip. And then put this over their eyes. And then people have reported, though, in using this, that you can really do things such as like if you're doing voiceover, right? You can actually have a transcription or sorry, what do you call it? A teleprompter running
Yes.
behind it. So you can actually run a video, but it really looks like you're looking at the screen.
Yeah,
So
and that's one thing I'm trying to learn. So thank you for telling me about that because I was looking into that, and having something like that down there. So
now, one of
okay.
the other parts too. Now, people kind of know that too. So sometimes when I look like I'm spacing off, like here, what I'm actually doing is doing this. So have you seen this? This is what I used to call digital assisted living, Jeff, which is while you're having a conversation. For instance, if I met you here, right, I can do things like look through your LinkedIn while we're having a conversation. So, you can pick up things. I've always thought, this was supposed to be the promise of Google Glass. It didn't quite work out that way. But I feel like this is a part of this because, of course, they're here on my setup, right? This is your LinkedIn information here. And I have you down here. So I can, sometimes it looks like I'm tuning out, but what I'm really doing is actually
Mhm.
gathering information that's helping me in the conversation. I don't know if you've ever used that to your advantage, the ability to gather multiple things while you're having a conversation.
Yeah. So when I do that, when I know I'm looking away and definitely clear that I'm typing, I usually tell my client, "Hey, I'm just taking some notes right now, but I'm listening." So I
Yeah.
do let them know about that. Like, "Hey, I'm still listening. I'm just taking some notes right now." And
Yeah.
so that's something that I've learned to do. I haven't received any feedback saying, "Hey, you're not listening to me," but what I feel that's just from my end. When I'm talking to someone, I see them look away. I appreciate it when they say, "Hey, I'm just taking some notes."
Yeah, I think here's the other key part too, Jeff, that I think you're already conscious and aware of, which is even if you're taking notes with this, the key here is that you have it too. It's above your camera that you come back.
Hmm.
Like you're not talking, you're listening, you're doing a listening intently, right? And you can take notes. But when you come back to say something, is to come back to the camera,
Hmm.
right, and make contact with it. I think that's something that's really useful. The worst I've seen too is people who accidentally stick the view of you, Jeffrey, like over here. So
Yes.
they think they're
You're just like
talking to
this.
you, right?
Yeah.
You're just
Yeah.
look. Your impression is like you're talking to the side of my head.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. I remember you had the prep question you had too was about how to make the meeting engaging, right? And it's hard when you're doing a consultation. There's not much I mean, the interaction's there. They're here to listen to me. But I think about other meetings and how you talk about, what makes virtual meetings engaging. And I think it's interaction, right? And there's in my meetings, there's plenty of interaction because the clients are looking for help, right? But I think
Right.
about other things, and I'm thinking about this one story. Remember, I taught this law. I taught this class for a law school, and it was the beginning of the pandemic. And I remember I only had 9 students in the class, and there was a lot of interaction because I'm teaching, so there's a lot of questions I have, and the students have to answer it. And this one student, I'll call her Sarah. She was fantastic, and she got like the best grade. She got like I gave her the top award in the class and everything. But it was all virtual. We never met in person once. A year later, I go to this function for law students, and I'm introducing myself. Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm and and then I meet this one law student, or actually she graduated already. She's working at a firm, very successful. And she goes, and I say, "Hi, I'm Jeff." She goes, "Yeah, I know you, Professor. I'm Sarah. I guess I'm not very memorable." And I felt so bad. I felt so bad because I was just like, no, we were just on camera the whole time, and your camera, I just can't recognize you when you're in person and in the cab. So I felt so bad. And so, but one thing I thought about too was that it's not about the quantity of interaction, it's the quality of interaction, and of course in the class it's hard. I mean, how can I make it we're supposed to cover the lesson, right? And
Right.
the problems. But I think I would have, hindsight, I would have done a little bit more interaction with the students that wasn't related to the schoolwork or to the assignment, or the problems we were covering, and more interaction so I could get to know them so that when I see them a year later, I won't say, "Who are you?"
Well, I love that story. One of the keys here is, we used to make the joke, which is, wait, you don't recognize me? Hold on a second. Right, and try and build a frame around you, and they're like, "Oh, that's who you are," right? The second advice we gave too, Jeffrey, is connection before content. Have you ever heard the term connection before content?
Mm-mm. Nope.
So, connection before content. Peter Block was a very famous consultant, and he put it out there, and he says, "No work can be done without relatedness." And so, like things that we would do, I would suggest that you do, which is great that you're teaching in a class, is to say, log up to 10 minutes early, just make sure your technology works. All right, and then what you do during that 10 minutes, there's no agenda, right? You just talk about current events, what you do, what you're doing this summer, right? What food are you eating? Just to find all those common points and build a connection before, on the clock, you say, okay, now we're going to start class. Let's move on to this class material. I want to give you kudos though, because you're doing one thing that a lot of people are not doing, which is you ask a lot of questions and of course probably require answers back from the group. Because here's the key: when somebody's talking, even if they don't have their camera on, they're talking to you, they're engaged.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do is one of my secrets now. I've been telling people when I deliver a 1 hour class, 50% or more of the time is allocated for the audience to talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the key aspects you gotta have to get to have a great engaging virtual meeting is to have that conversation and engagement. That conversation I think is so important. Jeffrey, I know conversation is something super important to you too in your advocacy work and your compassion work, right? You do a lot with the BIPOC communities in Seattle. What's the most memorable conversation you had in the last 3 years?
Memorable comment. Ooh, that's a hard one. I'm trying to think here.
I
It's
get to
hard
always
because
ask the easy questions here.
I know, because I've been doing my transition work for the past 3 weeks. That like my brain is just stuck on transition. What's the most impactful conversation I had? I'm sorry, that was your question, right? Impactful conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me think here. Most impactful conversation. Oh, wow. Well,
Searching
let me think.
things. Uh-huh.
Trying to think. I'll say it's one of my of a client who has memory care issues, and and my client, he's fine. He health wise is fine, and but it's great. He's Japanese American. He was born in I think in the late 30s. So, he has enough memories of the internment and the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II.
Hmm.
And I think impactful was, just listening to stories, listening to his stories, even though he has some memory care issues, his memory of that time period is vivid, right?
Very
Um,
true. Yeah.
and it was what was really impactful about it was just to hear him talk about um, kind of what he experienced. And he told this one story that after the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, and he remembers that he had gotten off a bus, and this woman, he was subjected to racism, of course, because being Japanese American. This woman came up to him and said to him, like, look, you know, I can't remember exact words that he said, that she said, but it was basically saying, like, look, you just ignore all those people. It's going to get tough, right? You're an American, and he just really appreciated that connection. And I like that, someone who's in their what 90s now, um, just still remembered that, and it
Mm.
still stuck with him. And so I think that was an impactful conversation to listen to. Just someone, I know about the stories, I know about the history, but hearing someone who went through it and experienced it was interesting.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Did you hear new artifacts are being dug up right now in North Seattle?
Mm,
So they're
no,
from Japanese American history. So it's like Edmond Colleges and North Seattle College. They're excavating a site and they're actually finding objects, I think, from one of the internment camps. So
no.
you might want to let your client know. I know that they're finding some pretty unique things, and they're all headed right now and being preserved into the museum, one of the museums here in Seattle. So
Mm, okay, well, it's good to know. Yeah,
yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, so let's then turn to the future. Jeff, what either wishes or what do you foresee in the future? And I actually would love also, if you don't mind, even I don't know if you study this part, but I'd love to hear your personal view on AI since it's kind of the rush in this year. I'd love to hear any takes that you have on it.
That's what I was going to actually talk about in the future. But before I do that, the one thing I think about is hybrid, right?
Is what?
Hybrid, and how we're going to be inclusive for people who are hybrid. We're not a hybrid. I'm sorry. What I mean by hybrid, not how you work, but meetings, right?
Yes.
Some people are going to be in person, some people are going to be virtual, and how that's going to work. How do you navigate that? Because the way you had meetings before, I think of it this way. Before the pandemic, um, when you had in-person meetings, it was a double-edged sword. It was good because, especially for people who are maybe BIPOC, you had these small conversations in these meetings that end after the meeting where you just start talking, right? And you can engage one-on-one. And that helped, maybe to find some allies. But also the other side of it is it hurt too, because it allowed people to form cliques, right? So doing virtual meetings has helped because it helps democratize kind of power, right? But it also does impact those individuals who are feeling, not as connected, that they can't really find somebody, because once the meeting ends, you end it. You don't have a short conversation afterwards. So I think that's a struggle there, especially as we move to more hybrid meetings. How are we going to balance those issues? And there's no solution there. I think it just plays out in whatever the dynamic. So, but that leads me to my next thought is about I wonder how AI can help with this. And I'm not talking about AI as like transcribing meetings, because there's great services like that, like Otter AI. I used to use them, and um, um, I'm just talking about how AI can maybe help facilitate meetings. And I wonder what the
Yes.
capabilities of AI, maybe relieving some of the pressure off of the host, or kind of saying like, hey, we haven't heard from these people, or,
Yes.
measuring tone. I'm really curious to see what the capabilities of AI there to kind of help facilitate meetings.
Yeah, we've already posited some of these, and I've seen one. I have a good friend that has a Zoom app called Town Hall, and it does measure the overall piece with that. And we've developed our own systems, like for instance, in larger or sometimes small to mid-sized meetings, we'll have the producer kind of add emojis when people talk. And so that's a cue to the facilitator. Like if somebody like Jeff has no emojis on him, it means that you haven't engaged or Jeff hasn't said anything. So we get our facilitators to preface saying, "Hey Jeff, I just want to check in with you." Right. We also add something called pass, which is we instruct that one of the group rules or the meeting rules is that you can say pass at any time. So Jeff, if you choose not to say anything at that time or not use the time or whatever, there's no question about it. You can just say pass, right? And then the facilitator checks you off and then won't engage you until later. So we've seen some of these things happen around it. And all right, I've heard of some things, but I haven't seen the right one put in practice that says, how do we have equity in a meeting? How do we bring all these other parts? That brings me back to hybrid too. So Jeffrey, I don't know if you've seen, I've created something called hybrid in a box. Have you seen it yet?
Not yet.
So it's an Anvil case, right? You put it in, like I can put it in my Land Cruiser. I drive into your hybrid meeting. Let's say it's your law association, right? And I set it up. And now the key here, and I think you'd be super interested in it, by default, virtual members in a hybrid meeting often feel like the second class citizen.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Sometimes they can't be seen. Sometimes they can't be heard. Right? Sometimes they can't hear the other things like that. And so we've worked to solve it. It's a hybrid in a box has 3 cameras and has 4, or mine actually now has 7 remote mics. So number one, you can always clearly hear somebody, and that you can clearly see them by the 3 cameras. I can always get the virtual person the best view in the house. And people have come back to it and said that was an amazing experience to be involved in that meeting, because we also have the technology. Like, let's say, Jeff, you are virtual in my hybrid meeting. I can put you on screen with the speaker. And so let's say I'm the speaker. You and I can have a full-blown conversation, right? Even though you're virtual and I'm in person, and have it feel like, that you're, a student that's in the class. So those are all the theories that I have. In fact, I actually have a class coming up Wednesday next week, August 16th. Okay. If you want to see about the best things, I have 6 things that are really key to hybrid. It's at 9:00. Make sure to go to engagingvirtualmeetings.com/P for programs. You can see my, it's called Beat Zoom Fatigue, and the next one is about hybrid. So I have a lot of opinions around that. And Jeff, I hope I get invited to one of your hybrid meetings, whatever it might be. I'd love to show and demonstrate, what we're up to. Asunta and others have already seen it, and they were really blown away as we did a 6-person panel as part of the Black Asian, relationship here in Seattle. Okay. Those are all great things. All right, well, here, let's close this out with this, Jeff. If people were to only remember one thing from this interview, what would you want that one thing to be?
I would say how you make an impact, and how you define what impact is, and it was a big revelation to me. And it's really been, one of the big things that's really changed in my life the past 3 years. Obviously the pandemic changed a lot, but in terms of my perspective, it's just like this idea of impact. It's really changed how I connect to people. And that it's not necessarily what I think is impactful. I'm trying to figure out what could be impactful to others.
That's genius and great. I'll give a shout out, of course, to the nonprofit I work with too, Urban Impact, that's here in Seattle. And I'd love that, that's your primary question. How can I, Jeff, make impact on people today? So, Jeff, well, I'll tell you that. You made an impact on me, and you made an impact on our amazing viewers and listeners who are here today. Jeffrey, thank you so much for being here on the Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody else, too.
All right, this is John Chen, and we just, again, concluded another Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast with the one and only Jeff Liang, who says, think about your impact, right? Go ahead and either hit the chat or feel free to comment on this video if you're watching it later and say, what impact would you like to have on the world today? I hope that I made an impact with you, and I look forward to seeing you next time or at my class on Wednesday, August 16th. Oh, yes, by the way, one is you can go to engagingvirtualmeetings.online. This podcast is releasing a new episode every Wednesday. And if you want to be the next guest, go to engagingvirtualmeetings.com/meet, select interview, and you too could be the next guest on the Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast. I'm John Chen, and I look forward to seeing you next time. This is John Chen, the author of the Amazon #1 hot new release, Engaging Virtual Meetings. I personally want to say thank you for listening to the Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast. It is my passion to help you eliminate bad virtual meetings. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you can get the latest episode of the Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast with all of the latest ideas. Hey, I want to meet you. If you want to talk about a virtual meeting challenge, or if you want to be the next guest on the Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast, just go to engagingvirtualmeetings.com/meet. That's engagingvirtualmeetings.com/meet, MEET, and find your best time to meet up. Thank you, and I look forward to engaging with you online.